Evening and happy Epiphany Sunday for those of you celebrating that today. Uh, yeah, uh, as you can see in our little bar tonight, we're talking about Preternatural presence. Now, I made a video about this like 3 years ago. I wasn't terribly satisfied with the way that the video turned out. I don't know how people like Pastor Paul are able to just talk into a microphone at a blank screen for hours on end. I do it for about 10 minutes and I'm feeling like I'm going crazy. Uh, so I don't make a whole lot of videos like that. But this is just an idea that I found compelling ever since I learned about it in seminary. And so we're going to take a look at it here. The name of the video was Adam Cold Showers, Adam in Paradise. And what the idea behind the preternatural gifts are is how do we explain the narrative in the book of Genesis, where Adam and Eve are in the garden? They appear to have the gift of immortality. They appear to, having been formed, fully grown out of the dust of the earth, already seem to be able to think and behave and act in the world. So how do we explain this? And the medieval way of explaining this is that, in addition to the natural gifts, so you look all the way down at the bottom of that chart there. Adam and following that Eve were given natural gifts, which you could just think of those gifts which are essentially constitutive of human nature, body and soul. Having those together combined, soul animated the body, that's what it means to be a human being. If you're missing one of those, you're not a complete human being. And so obviously that is down there at the bottom is the natural gifts. The idea behind a preternatural gift is that it comes from outside of what is essentially constitutive of a human being. It's not outside the order of nature itself, but it's outside of what it means to be a human being. So you could be a human being without these gifts. Uh, so those four preternatural gifts, as most medieval theologians would render them, were infused knowledge, integrity, impassibility, and immortality. They all start with an I. John Vervaeke would love that. And then at the very top is the supernatural gifts. That's participation in the life of God, participation in the life of grace there. So actually, when you're baptized, you receive those supernatural gifts again, but the preternatural gifts were lost forever, I guess, when Adam and Eve committed that first sin. It was part of their punishment that these gifts that God had given to them would be taken away. And so we look at the infused knowledge, right? Where did we get this idea that Adam would have infused knowledge? Well, we get that from the fact that he is able to name the animals when the Lord brings those animals before him. So obviously, if he has the capacity to name them, uh, he has to be able to know something already. And it's very interesting the way Thomas Aquinas explains this. He says, now, not all knowledge, he had infused knowledge of all of reality, but that doesn't mean he would know every single fact that there is to know. And the example he gives, which I think is very amusing, is he wouldn't know how many pebbles are at the bottom of some given stream. Right? He didn't have infused knowledge to that level of reality. He didn't know all of these individual facts. But what he did know was kind of the basic fundamental principles of reality. And from that, he could participate in the world and give the names to the animals. So, this infused knowledge that explains how Adam was able to name the animals. And this second one, integrity, is very interesting. At least I've always found it very interesting. So there was this sense, this gift of integrity gave the soul perfect control over the body. The gift of integrity gave the soul perfect control over the body, such that, oops, oh, I did not mean to do that. Uh, that the soul's influence was able to give that kind of perfect command to the body. So let's imagine this scenario. Let's imagine that you've just had dinner and somebody brings out a tray of brownies. You've had a perfectly balanced dinner. You've eaten enough. You know that this is the right amount of food for you to be eating, and that if you have one of these brownies, that'll be the perfect top off there. And the second you put anything chocolate um, in front of me, I don't want to just have one. I want to have the entire tray of brownies. And so, after eating that one brownie, which I know rationally should be enough for me, I want to go for the second brownie. I want to go for the third brownie. I want to go for the fourth and the fifth, until it actually makes me sick. Now, in integrity, if you had that preternatural gift of integrity, your soul would command your body through rationality to say, nah, you don't need that. And then your passions would be like, oh, okay, we got the orders from upstairs. We're not going to desire the brownie anymore because we can see that it is irrational for us. And what you have to remember is, rationality in English, it's got this kind of decrepit feeling to it. But ratio in Latin doesn't just mean knowledge. It could also mean like a measure. It could mean a rule. It means like balance and proportion. So it's got a much broader semantic range in Latin than it does when it came into English here. Another thing. So let's say that and I'm using lots of food examples here because everybody can relate to food. Let's say that you knew for a fact that eating a salad would be the best nutrition for you at this time. Eating that salad would taste as good as candy because your body would be like, oh, this is rational. Therefore, we're participating in goodness in an appropriate way. Therefore, this is good. And your senses would follow on that. There's perfect integrity between the body and soul, where the soul has proper command of the rest of the body. And missing that one, that makes everything much more interesting because now the body is rebellious. The body does not listen to reason and rationality. Body does whatever it wants. So following from that, we have impassibility. Passion, as you may know, is commonly translated as suffering into English, something that you undergo. And you could think that if you understood any kind of pain that you were feeling well enough, that it wouldn't actually cause suffering to you. You'd be like, oh, my body's giving me feedback about something I'm encountering in the world, and I just need to deal with that rationally. So there would be the sense that while there might be pain in the world, and I don't think you would ever be able to escape pain entirely, it would not cause that suffering. It would not cause that distress. You would be responding with perfect reason and coming from that immortality. So the Catholic doctrine is that the soul in itself is immortal. The soul possesses immortality in itself. And because of the integrity between the body and soul given by these preternatural gifts, the soul could communicate immortality to the body. And that's been taken away. So, I've always found this to be a very compelling image of what perfect humanity would look like, where the entirety of the human person has been subjected to not just logic like Mr. Spock, but to reason, to proper balance, to proper proportion and rationality. And I just really, really love this thing. Let's take a look here. I'm going to let Ted in, but we're going to go through some of the comments. Hey, Ted.
Hey there.
In a flat world, we think everything encompasses everything. Yeah. Integrity is also order, and that's related to control. Yep, that's right. Mark feels the same way about an entire tray of brownies. And Laura suspects somebody with preternatural integrity wouldn't have eaten any brownies. Unless, of course, the goal of eating the brownies would demonstrate acceptance of hospitality, or because they do provide a little bit of nutritional value, as long as it's in proper balance, it doesn't hurt anything. Uh, all righty. So, what do you think, Ted? Would you have liked those?
But I just got on. Would I have liked those?
The Preternatural gifts.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. I in fact, um, I would pretty much give up anything for it. Oh, just a second. Hold on. I gotta hop off for just.
Oh, something with the wife and children, I'm sure. Oh boy, and he kicked me off too. That's what happens when your administrators have a wife and kids, is they get distracted and then kick you off the stream. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I wasn't all that terribly satisfied with that video because I was trying to link it to Wim Hof, and I thought about it like the next day, and I'm like, that was stupid. I don't know if that was uh, the most rational thing I could have done at that point. But yeah, let me know what you think of these Preternatural gifts. If you think that's just a bunch of medieval silliness, or if you find the idea of uh, that to be compelling. Are you compelled, Lefebvre?
Am I compelled? I'm compelled to continue to disagree about eating the entire tray of brownies being irrational. I think it's required. I think your idea of rationality must be wrong because it's brownies. You have to eat all the brownies. You have to.
No, you don't.
I do. I do. I've met the brownies and they won.
And when I was in seminary in Detroit, the secretary for the vocations office would ask the seminarians to do favors, and we had the two houses, the college and the theology, and whoever had more people sign up to do them, that house would get like 6 trays of the most outrageous brownies delivered to your lounge.
Really?
Just oh my gosh, and that's why I always go for the brownies because it's just burned into my memory. And nothing's ever tasted that good since.
I bet. I bet.
So
A brownie
it was
well
sort of a
earned.
fall. It was sort of a fall from paradise for me.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, no, I like that outline. That's really good. You could do a lot with it. See, this is one of the puzzling things to me. It's like a lot of people in the Peterson sphere try to put maps together and relate things all over the place, and it's like I think there's somebody else already has better maps and better words and better everything. And granted, on my side, it's kind of like, well, some of that needs translation just because there's stickiness in the words and the language. But I'm always surprised that there's not more of a push towards that. Like, I don't know, guys, we already, like, because people inevitably go to tarot or Kabbalah or whatever, and like, fair enough. Like, I'm familiar with all that stuff for the same reason. Like, that's what I came into first. But actually, some of the systems that were already out there were better.
We're supposed to have Josh come in here, but he might be having connection issues.
Uh-oh. Yeah, it looked like he was here, and then now it looks like he's not.
Well, we'll see if he comes in. Yeah, well, hey, I'll take the compliment right there. I found our mapping to be pretty satisfying the whole way through. Hey, Josh has made
There
it.
he is.
There I am.
Did they teach you about the Preternatural gifts in RCIA?
I think I don't. I think we kind of brushed over it, but we kind of moved a little faster through Genesis, and we also we doubled up our nights too because we hopped in midway through RCIA through the year. So we actually did two nights a week for like oh gosh, it was like 4 or 5 months or something like that. Yeah, so and that was so we could get confirmed that Easter. But I think we started classes like the October. It was like October or November the year before. But I think we did go over something because I remember like going from my Protestant or Bible teaching from before my childhood. I was trying to see how much of that kind of tracked onto what I had been taught because I got taught a lot of stuff. I don't know if you have either one of you ever heard the term Shekinah glory?
No,
So
no, it sounds like a band or something.
yeah, yeah, it does. That's actually true. So, um, I, very early in my childhood, I always have to look up where Shekinah glory comes from. I'm guessing it's a Jewish term or something like that. But that was how we were told that they were kind of in their perfect state while on Earth. That like they weren't naked because they were covered in Shekinah glory, meaning like they had these like glowing bodies, and that they were like
Oh,
perfect bodies, and that they like God gave them perfect bodies. That's why they were living forever, or something like that. Because I've heard a lot, and I'm actually not sure what the Catholic kind of I guess version of how long Adam was in the garden before he fell. Because I mean, because I guess that's kind of what the like it as far as immortality and stuff like that. Um, you know, I've heard both ways. He was in the garden for a really long time, and I've also heard he fell away very quickly, like within
Yeah,
like a year
there
or
isn't
something.
any official Catholic doctrine on that.
Okay, I didn't know if there was.
I think Thomas Aquinas was in the yeah, it took about 6 hours camp. Uh,
Yeah, like real darn quick.
yeah, like this didn't last all that long.
Well, and I had heard that that was kind of like the Israelites fall after they go into like they go out of Egypt, and then they like Moses goes up the mountain and he leaves them just for like just a bit. I mean, it can't be any more than like 3 days or so.
yeah.
And by the time he's back, they're into full on pagan, just pagan worship again. And
Mhm,
it's like
mhm.
quickly, like real quick, like it does not take long. And I've kind of also just, I'm having a thought now, but it's kind of like, you could almost probably say it's a little bit like humans. Like, have you ever heard, like, if we're like in the average city, if it's without electricity for like, I think it's like 3 days,
Yep.
it goes downhill really quick.
Right.
And so, like, when
We
the
are
master,
9 meals away from absolute anarchy.
yeah, no, I would definitely, and probably a little bit less in some neighborhoods, but but yeah, no, I mean that's probably mapping on there a little bit, just because if whatever we like, I mean, whether we want to admit it or not, we kind of do have a little bit of an idol with electricity as our comfort. As long as the light bulb's on, we feel like we're okay. In that, and like we take a lot of comfort in electricity, running water and electricity. That is definitely like a comfort to us. That probably was akin to fire or something like that back in the day. But anyways, when the lights go out, yeah, we go downhill real fast. But with Adam, you're saying that, the term preternatural gift, I hadn't, that doesn't seem to ring a bell from RCIA, but
Well, that's
um,
a very medieval way of doing things.
okay,
So,
okay,
um,
gotcha.
I I might have mentioned this in our RCIA class, but like I was more like, "Hey, seven sacraments," because.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. That's what we were trying. We in Eucharist and everything like that. Yeah.
but some people. It's amazing what people grab onto when you're teaching, and as long as it's true, you don't mind. But you just kind of throwing stuff out there, especially in an RCAA class, and I never knew how it was landing. So
I think all because of I mean, I would say most of the people you've probably given in the class to are from a Western worldview, or they're from the West in most ways. So, and because of that, like Tom Holland's book says, we've all kind of had this weird inherited version of Christianity that we base pretty much our worldview off of. So much so that like even the homosexuals can't realize that they're doing. I shouldn't have said the homosexual movement, the LGBTQ movement is like shutting down, like like they're referencing morals and that. It's like, okay, well, you're saying like you don't like me because the church says what your behavior is a sin, but you're saying that my behavior of judging you is a sin. Where are you getting that? Like, where are you
yeah,
getting that idea of sin, that I've broken some moral code? Where are you getting your morals? And that, well, well, I just feel it, and it's like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
no, you don't. You've been brainwashed just like everybody else has, and that.
yeah.
But no, at least that's, I don't know. I have a brother that's a homosexual, and it's very hard to engage with certain topics with him, just because it's like, well, you only think that because you're a Christian. It's like, well, you only think that I'm wrong because you have an inherited sense of morality that you think that I'm stepping on your freedoms or something like that. It's like, where are you getting all this?
You
And that
only think that breathing's important because oxygen is necessary for survival. It's like, Well, yes, actually, you've
Yeah,
got me. Guilty as
yeah,
charged.
yeah. No, so like we all have that kind of sense of sense of Christian moral values instilled in us from that we inherit just from being Americans in a lot of ways.
I don't know.
And,
Do you worry about that kind of going away?
I don't, because I think that it's like a lot of things. I think it's like a story that I think it can get hijacked. I think it can get manipulated. I think it can, but I think it. Yeah, I mean, it's not inherent. It needs to be taught, but I think
Yeah.
I don't know that that's the part of a part of our culture that's really going to go away per se. The idea, like, because most people, understand the concept of like not sharing. Like that's a
Hmm.
bad monkey thing to do. You're a bad monkey if you don't share.
Hmm.
And like if you're and I always go back to the monkey mind because it's like you can see certain moral values even inside of monkeydom that
Hmm.
which is really weird. There's some really interesting things that map on there about leadership and stuff. Like, for instance, it's the drunk monkeys on the beach that are often the leaders. Like the ones that are passed out, like can't stand up or just like falling over. Those are the leaders. And like apparently in monkey world, like, to be a fall down drunk, I mean, that means you're the leader guy or
That was
something.
Alexander the Great too.
Yeah,
No,
no,
but
I mean, a
that's the luxury signal.
luxury
If you're
signal.
if yeah, if you're so good at what you do that you have spare time to drink,
Oh,
then you're super
I like
confident.
that. And
Well,
that would
you're
be, yeah,
right. People don't understand elitism is a signal, and it's a
yeah.
signal of excess, right? Because you go into these things like this is one of the things that always bothers me, right? People buy on price, and I'm like, wow, people so don't buy on price, which
Mm,
not to say price isn't a factor, and that some people aren't limited by price. Like I'm not buying a Mercedes ever, right? I'm just never
yeah,
going to buy a Mercedes, right?
yeah.
But also, Mercedes is in business. Tell me, especially since Lexus came along, tell me why anybody should buy a Mercedes ever.
Hmm.
A Mercedes car isn't that much better to justify the price, right? It's
And
not
it's interesting.
that much.
No, and it's interesting because I'll see pretty pragmatic people driving a Mercedes, and I'm like, what is attracting you
Well,
to that?
because it's a signal of excess, right?
Yeah,
And excess is a signal of competence.
yeah,
And you should
yeah.
worship competence to some extent. Like those who don't, those people seem to know
Well,
something I
I mean,
don't because they have more.
yeah. Even Jordan I think in a lot of, I haven't listened to all of his lectures. I did read I listened to his book and I caught most of it. It's dense a little bit, but he was talking about like, um, I think it was in his Spirit of the Father lecture, and he was like, it's there's a spirit that's been running through all throughout time of masculinity, and it's it looks something like competence, I think is what he said. And so he's like that's what women are attracted to also is like something like competence.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, I mean, you don't have exact mappings for things, right? Despite
Yeah.
what the science people tell you, right? In science, you do have exact mapping for things. Unfortunately, science also doesn't work to map the world. That might be a clue, right? But you don't have exact mappings for things, so you kind of have to figure out, well, who knows what they're doing? Is it the people
Yeah.
who have excess, who can afford to drink and pass out on the beach? Probably, and you see that, right? Like, we-
Mm-hmm.
wealthy people have these weird parties. If you
Mm-hmm.
like relative parties I go to, right? Like there was that whole what was it called? The fire gathering or whatever. That was a big disaster, right? Because it turned out to be a scam. But they basically rented an island, and a bunch of wealthy people flew in and tried to have this fire event, and like they do stuff like I've been there. I've been to these places. So there's an island called Cuttyhunk, um,
Mm-hmm.
off of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and my buddy took me there in his boat. It is a gorgeous boat. But I mean, he's not a fancy guy, right? Like
Yeah.
the boat wasn't great. I mean, it was an awesome boat. It sailed really super fast, catamaran. So we go over there, and like just the way they do things as
Yeah.
wealthy people is so
Excellent.
different. And like they, one of the islands near Cutty Hunk, because it's on an island chain, the Elizabeth Islands, the end of the Elizabeth Islands. One of the islands has a little runway on a plane on it, because that guy's got a house. He owns that whole island. So just their interaction with the world and the things they do and the things, everything on that island is fantastically more expensive than you can imagine. It's like being in Hawaii. Hawaii, everything's expensive in Hawaii because it's an island. These islands aren't that far away, and there's no reason for things to be quite that expensive, other than all these people have money in excess. And when you have excess money, it doesn't matter how much you spend. And people who've never had excess money don't understand that, right? So they think it's wasteful. It's not wasteful. It's a signal, though, right? And usually you're buying convenience. And the fact that you can afford convenience tells people something about your status. And that's how people are able to kind of get away with this stuff is that signal is important. Now, it can be faked. That's where people, right? Because again, it's not a perfect mapping of success or competence or whatever.
Yeah, you'll find somebody just up to their eyeballs in debt, just trying to keep up with the Joneses around them, and they look the part, but you're like, yeah, you're floating on.
Right.
You got no.
That happens all the time. And that's why they
Yeah.
do it, right? They do it to seem more successful or more competent or better, higher up some hierarchy somewhere, imagined or real, than they really are. And part of that, I think, goes back to the beginning of the stream. These they're not accounting for the gifts that they have, right? They're just sort of assuming, well, we can buy gifts, right? We can buy our way into betterment instead of appreciating with gratitude what we have, because we all return to that, right? Like when you're on your deathbed.
Yeah.
I wonder if the invention of philanthropy was a way of signaling excess, but putting it to more productive use than luxury goods.
I don't think. I mean, I think philanthropy's always been around. It's
Mhm.
just that all philanthropy was done through the church. So all
Right, right.
wealthy people just put their wealth into the church, and now they don't do that anymore. We debate all day the reasons, right? Pointless.
Well,
There's still enough people doing it for us to still be building churches here in North Dakota, but not like it was.
Right.
I'll admit, not like it was.
Not like
but
it
you
was, because it was all the wealth before. Like
Yeah.
all excess wealth pretty much went through the church.
Well,
With
and you
very
even
few
see that as
exceptions.
a signal. We say the term virtue signaling, when somebody will say, I am donating, as a politician, I'm going to make sure that we donate this much to this cause, even though it, we'll get rich somehow on the other side of it, or something like
Maybe,
that,
maybe
that,
not. Not
well,
everyone.
like I said,
Not everyone's that evil. A lot of politicians actually believe that what they do works. It's
yeah, but
like,
they
you know,
believe that, but they don't, they're so deluded because that whole world is
they're
is
not.
a complete,
That's
yeah,
not
I don't,
fair,
I'm,
Josh. They're not deluded. They're too stupid to be deluded. They're true believers. No, they really are. I mean,
well, no, that, yeah,
everybody
but
thinks everyone's really smart. And the bottom line is most people are not, by definition, most people are below average, right? They're just, or
But
half
I'm
the
just
people are
saying
below
deluded
average.
in the
So
sense that they're not interpreting reality. Like you're saying, you're using the term stupid. I'm just using the term deluded because it's, I guess, maybe a little bit less harsh or something. But
I don't.
it just
No,
is.
I
Yeah,
don't think they're deluded. They're not deluded. It's not like they have a system in place that validates their beliefs. It's that,
well, maybe.
right, they haven't been given a rationality for doing what they do, right?
Yeah,
They've just been told this is the way it works. And because they can't work it out, because everyone's intelligence is limited and their cognitive
yeah,
ability is limited, even if your intelligence is high, if you're not paying attention to something,
yeah,
it's easy to be fooled, right? And so They are true believers that, like,
Yeah.
well, if you spend more money on schools, you're going to get smarter people, which has been obviously
Well,
not true.
I just mean some of the obvious ones like AOC chopping up. I don't know if you saw the little video of her chopping up lemons with her T-shirt on that says "Tax the Rich" and stuff like that. And my brother-in-law, who's like a multimillionaire, complaining about how it's the rich that are ruining, that are making the economy do this or that. And I'm like, bro, you're the rich. Like, I don't know how to but like we talked about before, it's all about this passing off. So for the rich guy, it's Bezos and Elon Musk that are the
You look
problem.
up. Right. You always
Yeah,
look up
yeah.
above you for the problem. In the postmodern world, though, you should, because according to postmoderns, it's top-down power from above, power
Right.
as control, and control through force or threat of force. Like, that's their
Right.
worldview. Very simple.
But yet they still rebel against they'll rebel against the norms, and in that they fall into the same it's a really weird like mimicry they do, where they do this thing like I need to have the freedom to express myself, like sexually and with my clothes and with I should be able to walk. Yeah, I should be able to walk around without my top on. Screw your civilization rules.
That's the individualism, right? That's what that is. But think about this, Josh. Hold on. So you mentioned virtue signaling earlier, and I don't think very many people realize this. Let's think about virtue signaling. What is that, and why would you have to do it? The only reason you'd have to signal your virtue is because it wasn't obvious. And maybe the reason why it's not obvious is because you're not embedded in a system where your virtue is contrasted clearly, or where you can properly express it.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't exist, you're not actually virtuous.
Well, and like you were saying earlier, do you worry about this like the inherited virtues that we get, or the inherited moral values that lead to virtuous living? That are we worried about this going out of our culture? And I guess maybe upon talking about it a little bit more, maybe I don't know if I'm worried, but it seems so ingrained in Western culture that if it does go out, it'll be because we literally lost our story. Like we don't remember who we are in any way, shape, or form. So we'll be something completely different. We won't be Americans anymore. We'll be.
But it's not. But it's not our story. We've lost our ability to participate in a good story. And see, this is where I get into the difference between crisis of faith and meaning crisis. The meaning crisis people cannot properly participate in any story, and so they just create new ones in an attempt to participate. All the new ones they create are not going to work because, like, you need distributed cognition through a couple thousand years, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 years, in order to create a story that you can properly participate in. That might be a hint, by the way, right? And so the crisis of faith people at least have some chance because they're aware of some story, right? And maybe they've fallen out of that story or bought into the individualism or whatever, right? And then they're trying to virtue signal, it doesn't work. And then they get re-enchanted through Peterson, fair enough, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, okay. And that looks like the same transformation or whatever, right? It looks the same, but I don't think it is. I think it's actually a fundamentally different interaction. But that's why you need virtue signaling, because you're not participating in a story where your virtue can shine through, right? And through you, because virtue shines through you, right? Virtue is way bigger than any of us, even combined. Even if it was super friends, like virtue is way bigger. So it shines through you in a way. And it's like, oh, okay. But in order for it to do that, you have to have right order, right relationship with things. And I think, again, the beginning of the stream was really informative because it's like, where do we start with being rightly ordered?
Infuse knowledge, integrity, impassibility, and immortality. It's that simple.
I think so. I really like that outline. I've never heard of that before. So I'm like, oh, that's a really cool outline.
It's an underappreciated aspect of Catholic theology, which
it's hidden. And now we get into my objection. Why is this hidden? Why haven't I heard of this before?
It's because we're stupid and we like failing.
Why don't we have posters everywhere, Father Eric? Everywhere, on every street corner.
That's a lot of advertising money that I don't have, man.
No, you don't need money to do that. If the Christians would just get off their ass, it's like, oh, now we have the rich people donating to build the cathedral. The people should be building the cathedral, and they're part-time. Like, what the hell? That's what they used to do.
Yeah.
It wasn't paid for. You didn't have large sums of money transferring to build cathedrals in the Middle Ages. What the hell? They had a much
Yeah.
more efficient system.
They had a virtuous populace that knew how to do work with stone and mortar.
And their virtue shined through in their interaction with building the cathedral, however small that may be. Oh, I helped to make sure that I helped the cart out that had some of the stones for the cathedral. You don't need to signal anymore. You don't need virtue signaling. And virtue signaling is one of those deep ironies where on the one hand, it's total BS. On the other hand, it's a completely accurate description of a problem, right? Even though it seems like a solution to a problem, but it's actually a description of a problem.
Well, and it's a. I mean, we've all seen that. I mean, like I don't even need to bring up a movie analogy or a book analogy. I'm sure there's some character that'll come to your mind as I say this, but like we all know the falsely virtuous villain in the movie. The one that seems like a nice guy, but he's really just a real scumbag. Even though he gives, he'll. I don't know, like I guess I'm kind of thinking of like the Sheriff of Nottingham character or something like that, like in the Robin Hood. Like, he goes to church and he gives his alms to the poor and that, and he's just this rotten, horrible dude. And then, it's actually the outlaw that is way more virtuous, and that. But and we like that story, and we see, I guess, because we've seen it so many times in history where we've seen, a man in power who we know is just rotten, do these virtuous things and that. But like you said, I think that in a lot of ways they are true believers. Like I complained about AOC yesterday, but yeah, when she first got on the scene and like started spouting her kind of a lot of nonsense, I was like, I know this girl's a true believer. I'm not like a lip or a mind reader or anything. I'm not good about reading people or whatever, but yeah, but sometimes, I mean, I know when I see a leader, because I guess I'm probably more of a follower than I want to admit in some ways, but I know when I'm drawn to somebody, I'm like, yeah, you believe this, hook, line, and sinker. Like that's why you're getting followers, is because you definitely believe that you are virtuous, and I mean, and so yeah, she's drank her own Kool-Aid pretty heavily.
Well, whatever Kool-Aid she drank, she's able to transmit it.
Well, it's from her professor or whatever it was. Yeah.
But that's one aspect of charisma, and charisma is a component of leadership. It's not required for leadership. See, this is where people get confused. They think leadership is charisma. It's like, no, actually, you can have leaders who aren't charismatic. That's actually not hard, right? And people get confused, right? You can have leaders with terrible voices, Dr. Jordan Peterson. You can, right? There's all kinds of people that can lead, even with those problems, and because we don't understand what leadership is, because in some ways leadership is a really complex issue.
I've been thinking about this recently, especially with the conversation that's been happening around the unmentionable. Is one of the, I think, probably the key to leadership, the sine qua non, that which needs to be there, is somebody's bearing responsibility for a real outcome.
Right.
And like somebody's actually caring, and it's like, doesn't matter if they're charismatic, doesn't matter if they're intelligent,
right?
It doesn't matter if they're virtuous. If you're leading something, you're taking the responsibility to make things happen.
Right. No, and I like that. You're trying to make something specific happen. By the way, that question was brilliant. I was like surprised. I'm like, oh, I didn't.
You were surprised.
Tell me about that.
All right. Okay.
Oh, that was brilliant. Also, it worked. Right. You could.
What are you guys referencing?
I just agreed
the
to
Friday
something
stream.
Yeah, I didn't realize the implications of what I just agreed to. Oops. And now I have to answer a question based on that. Yeah, it was brilliant, but we'll get to it, Josh. Don't worry.
Okay, yeah, no, sorry, I was out.
But you're right. The leadership aspect is about being willing to take the responsibility for the results of trying to enact something, whatever those
Yep.
results are. Like, because a lot of times people think, oh, that person's trying to do that, and therefore it's like, no. This is way more complicated. There's a bigger sacrifice because failure is far more likely. So whatever it is you're trying to do, once you set that telos, right, that goal, that purpose in place, the odds that you will achieve it are very, very, very low. And so people don't want to set the telos. And then when you set the telos, when you say, no, we're going to do this, we're going to try to make this happen. And then it doesn't have to be specific. It can be vague. It doesn't really matter in some sense, right? But it should be specific enough. And this is where it comes into play, right? That a leader can lead you there, and you can define a structure that makes that happen. And those are sort of the three components that you need to have a thing. And I didn't even think of it that way, Father Eric. So yeah, if you want to go into that little story, I thought that was great.
Okay, all righty. Promised myself I wasn't going to rant about. No, actually, I didn't promise myself. I said I wasn't going to start there. But now that we've gotten there, let's talk about this thing that I throw up on the board here. TLC rule number 1. Shh. Now, where did that come from? That came from me listening to, I think it was one of Jacob's streams. Jacob, and I think Hezi was there, and a few other folks, right? And they started talking about this little corner, this, and that little corner, that, and I was just like, dear Lord, this is boring. Like, I did not enjoy listening to that conversation. It just felt self-referential, like it was going nowhere, and that there was nothing really for the intellect to grab onto and to understand things. And so I'm like, all right. And this was about the time that I was thinking about getting my stream going. So this is just over a year ago. And I'm like, fine, I'm going to make this little graphic. We're just going to have this rule because I don't want to talk about it, And, in conversations with, Mark and other people, started getting to the, like, okay, why is it such a bad topic for conversation? And I don't know who came up with it first, and it doesn't really matter. But the idea was like, well, there really isn't anything there. There isn't any there that we could actually talk about with this supposed little corner of the internet here. And then Pastor Paul started talking about it sometime this week, and it started coming up in the live stream. And I'm like, all righty, enough of this nonsense. And so I asked a question. I put it in. This was the Friday Q&A, so this just happened a couple of days ago. And I'm like, in order for a thing to exist, it must have a telos, a head, and structure. And he's like, yes, I agree with that. And I'm like, what are the telos, head, and structure of this little corner of the internet? And the answer he gave, if I believed it, I'd be very happy with, right? Because he basically said, it's Christ, but I'm like, that doesn't work, man. Like,
he described Christendom roughly,
yeah.
except with no structure, because he just refused the structure answer entirely.
Yeah. And I was, when I heard that answer, I'm like, yeah, that didn't change my mind. So, perhaps Pastor Paul will have some further time to reflect on this. And then I put on a lot of comments on Pastor Paul's video from yesterday. And I got a little punchy in the comment section. And I don't do that very often. So anyway, we're just going to continue our little thing. And I don't really want to talk about this a whole lot more in order to keep my own rules. But Mark, you sounded like you had something you wanted to say. So,
well, I think the foundation of these things and understanding things is important. Like, you can't just take random parts and put them together in whatever order you think is appropriate and have a thing. Like, that's not available to you. And part of the reason why we don't know that, and that's a very postmodern thing, but like, you're fully in postmodernism when you're talking like that. People who are talking like that. in recent videos I've watched. You're fully ensconced in postmodernism at that point. Like there's little way for you a way out of that. I would say that attitude is how we got here. Like the problems of today that you see around you, that you can place in quote modernity or whatever other framing you want to use. That's where it comes from. It comes from this idea that you can grab random pieces, put a name to them, and then you have a thing. And when you don't have an axiomatic starting point, like you talked about in the beginning of the stream, right? When you don't have that and you don't have a definition for what is a thing, because it's an excellent question. It's a question everyone's been asking. I've heard Vervaeke talk about this, right? I've heard Pageau talk about this, right? Peterson talks about this.
Final cause get you there like that.
Right. Well, and you need a story. I've heard somebody talk about that recently. Kale's been talking about that with Pastor Paul. Actually, I thought that video. I'm not done with it, but it's actually the first half of the video is terrible. And you get like 35, 40 minutes in, and it gets really good. Thingness is important. Like you can't just slap a name on 5 items that you like. Or a flotilla, or a bunch of people, or a bunch of people that know a bunch of things, or like everybody that talks to a certain person, or everybody that watches these 5 channels on the internet, they're all of the same type. No, that's not true. Like if I watch Jordan Peterson and I just disagree with everything, and somebody else watches Jordan Peterson and they agree with everything, we don't have anything in common. Like you can say we both watched all of Jordan Peterson's work, and maybe that's true. That's not in common if our attitude towards it is opposing, like polar opposite. We wouldn't have anything in common. That's not true. So you can't use designations, and I would call these materialists, oddly, from the people that have been using this terminology. They all seem materialist to me. They keep using these sort of signals or indicators, right, to come up with a name or whatever, a random name, and try to fit everybody into this bucket, and then they universalize it. And well, now the latest trend is to ununiversalize it and imply that somewhere there might be a boundary, by the way, but it's only an implication, and they'll never draw one, right? But you don't have a structure. And you can't have a head if you're not going to draw a boundary, if you're not going to have a container. That was the only, if I were to be so bold as to critique, that was the only thing that was missing, was although a structure implies a boundary, right? But that was the only thing that was missing from that question. Was like, don't you think you need a boundary and like enforcement of the boundary? Otherwise you don't have a thing because it blends into everything else. Right. And that's that universalism, flattening. That's all pretty much the same thing. Anytime you try to universalize something, right, you flatten it and it spreads out. So you need boundaries to keep a shape, to keep a hierarchy, right? I mean, anytime you flatten a hierarchy, you're gonna cause a flood. You're gonna flatten things out, and that's the only way to get rid of that. And that's part of the problem. Just thinking about what things are and how to think about them. I thought that was.
I think it's useful to use the analogy of a human body, right?
Yeah,
like the only way a human being is able to exist is by existing in a certain space, taking up a certain amount of dimensions, existing in relation with other objects, which is a boundary, right? And we got the skin. The skin is literally a boundary, right? And we have to keep certain things out, and we let other things in. Otherwise, we die, right? What is death? Well, death is the separation of the soul from the body. That's one thing. But you don't have the boundaries anymore. You can just kind of you just start falling to pieces, right? You also have a head, right? Something that's centrally coordinating, organizing thing. And if you're going to be a good human being, you need to have the appropriate telos, and the appropriate telos is giving glory to God and saving souls. So,
yeah, no, and I don't know. Like, I mean, the corner or whatever. Like, I don't know. Like, that's not really what. Maybe at initial, I was trying to figure out what the hell or heck everybody was talking about for a long time, and and like it's a very like I don't know, it's all over the place. It doesn't like I don't know. It just I
If
understand
you if you
what
can't
now I have a
explain
better.
it, if you can't
What's that?
explain it, that might be because
Yeah.
there's no there. Right? And that's
No.
like nobody
I,
wants to
yeah.
admit that. It's okay. Like
Yeah.
it's okay
It
that
is.
there's
It
not
is.
a there there.
It's fine, right? Look at me. Look at me. I do this every week. Sorry about last week. My internet literally went out, right? But I do this every week. I show up on Mark's Discord and the Bridges of Meaning Discord. I'm participating in something with existence that doesn't have essence. How do you feel about that? I don't know.
Well, and I think that the whole idea of a head and a leader is sort of misunderstood. The way Sally Joe talks about this is just brilliant. Like she's really got it because she was in the military. The head of the spear takes the brunt of the force, right? And so without a leader out front doing whatever that leader does better than everybody else, clearing the brush or whatever it is, the other people cannot do that work. Like it cannot. And that's
Yeah.
what people miss because we're not
Well.
equal. Like
Yeah.
like Josh has skills that I do not have. Period. We are not equal. Right? Who's better is like up for discussion. Really depends what you're doing. Are you
Yeah.
are you
No.
doing the
Who's
kind of
more
work that
competent in this
Josh
particular
does?
situation? Yeah.
Am
Like
I
if
am
we're
I
doing
going to be
computer
bringing trees
stuff,
down in my yard? No.
if we're doing
No.
computer
No.
stuff, Mark's in charge. If we're cutting trees down, Josh is in charge. And if
There you
we're
go.
running a
Yeah.
Bible study, I'm in charge. It's like,
There's
Yeah.
3 leaders. We're all leaders of different things. That's okay. And maybe we can't be in the same group, right? Maybe there's no scenario where I can lead the group because it's purely a computer thing and Josh is going to care and Father Eric's going to care at the same time. I'm okay
Mm.
with that. Like I have other groups that I lead where hey, the computer thing's important and so we're all going to follow Mark. Oh, fair enough. That's fine. I'm happy to do that work. And it's also people don't understand. It's a sacrifice to lead. It's
Mhm.
a high cost. It's a very high cost. And people are like, oh, leaders are in charge. And so they've got it going on. And even Pastor Paul talks about this. Like, oh, all these things in my life would have to change for me to start leading pretty much anything, any undefined thing. And boy, my wife wouldn't be happy, and I wouldn't be able to get together with my kids, and I might be on the road more, and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's a sacrifice. Peterson's like on the road all the time right now. What I mean, and maybe that's good for him, and maybe that's fine. I don't know. It's still a sacrifice though, because man, I like being at home and not having to leave the house sometimes. Not all the time,
No,
but it's
when
nice.
yeah, I've had a couple of guys that I've trained to take over the like I was leaving a tree company, and I was trying to get see who was going to be the next kind of foreman and who was going to try. And we you could go by well, this guy has this much experience and maybe this and I was telling my boss, I was like, man, I was like, you're looking for the guy that could sacrifice. I was like, you're looking for that guy, and I said, I was like, that's your leader, the one that's gonna, actually answer his phone on his weekend. I was like, now which one is that? We came up, we both, kind of looked at each other, and we're like, well, that's Bear Claw, and it was just, he didn't have as much experience as the other guy. He was a bit bigger. He didn't climb as fast or anything like that. But I said, I think so too. Right before I left, I told Bear Claw, it's all your responsibility. I said, everybody out here, all the equipment is all your responsibility. If it goes to hell today, I was like, that's on you. And I was like, this isn't, and I was like, and you don't sit in your truck and you don't do paperwork when there's dangerous work being performed. I was like, you do that on the way to the job and you let somebody else drive. I was like, and I was like, and you sit in the back and you do your paperwork then. I was like, you don't get to take lunch because you need to be you might need to make phone calls during that time. I was like, so you
Right.
eat lunch on the run. And I was like, and I was just describing to him how much this job actually sucks. But it was like, and I was like, the thing is that you're doing this because you have the older brother mentality, and he understood that because he had a younger brother that was he always just said he was on the spectrum, but I suspected there was other things going on with him. But and he understood how to take responsibility for somebody because he had been an older brother, and he had a dad that was, even though as flawed as he was, knew how to take responsibilities for his son. He's like, yeah, when I flipped the car and put it in a ditch one day, didn't matter the fact that, my dad was sitting at home or, and didn't want to deal with his, drunk son, and he's like, no, he came down to the sheriff's office, picked me up, talked to the sheriff's office. And so he saw, he knew how to take responsibility in situations where everybody wants to be like, hands off, I didn't do it. And I was like, and he could pick up the ball and run with it, and even though and if you pick up the ball and run with it, you're risking losing the game. You're risking, you know what I mean? To be participatory, there's a risk, and things like that. Even the military, like you were saying, that I spent a short time in basic, and they told it they were doing urban mount training, military operations in an urban environment. They were teaching us how to go door to door and stuff, and they said, yeah, when you're trying to figure out who should go through the door first, you want to select the most experienced guy. And I said, what? And they said, well, what if we're all kind of around the same experience? Because somebody that wanted to be a leader spoke up and asked that question. And he said, whoever survived the last encounter, because whatever worked there, he figured it out. He's like, and because he's like, you never know what's on the other side of a door. It's totally unpredictable. But somehow this guy survived, and that means he should go first this time. So he's like, he kind of becomes a victim of his own success and ends up taking on more risk because he's doing the most risky job over and over again.
It's almost as if 1 to more is given, more will be expected.
Oh yeah,
almost.
Spider-Man.
Almost as if
somebody should have written that down in a book somewhere a couple thousand years ago and passed it down. That would have been really handy. Well, and the thing is, with responsibility, I think we're dealing with a couple of generations of people who haven't been trained how to be responsible and aren't aware of what responsibility is.
And it's like you're looking up and you're seeing the wrong things.
Yeah.
Right. You don't look up. I mean, you use this example all the time, Mark. Like people look to Elon Musk and he's like, oh, he's super intelligent. Right. And then you say, no, Elon Musk slept under his desk at work until he became really successful. And it's like, okay, yeah, you got to look up and see that. And actually, I don't want to do that. And I don't think all the billions are actually worth that. So,
that's what attracted me. Yeah, that's what attracts me to Elon Musk as like a worker, and that is as I look at it, I was like, no, I would follow. Like if he's willing to put in that much effort, I want to see what he's building. Like, you know what I mean? Like I want to, and I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to put him on a pedestal, but I could see his work ethic, and that's impressive. And I mean, even in I guess, coming from a Protestant background, my father found Calvinism a little bit later, but it mapped onto went on to his life really well. And I mean, in my family, we've always been workers. That's just something we did. You have to be working. It's like, it was just something that got pushed, homeschooled with, 4 boys and that. And, we all got ourselves into different trades and things like that. And that sometimes we're out of work. That wasn't so fun, but, it was just what's expected, that you have to be a hard worker, and that you have to, now, a lot of times I think that my family kind of gets stuck there and they're not very entrepreneurial. They don't recognize that you don't have to make somebody else rich. You can start your own company, and things like that. I wish that was different, but as far as work ethic
but can you, like, a part of like most businesses fail, just like 95%. It's, I've started a bunch of businesses. Almost all of them failed except one. So, and that one wasn't super successful. Not that I've made a lot of money. I certainly did. Most of it got stolen from me, but like I made a lot of money. And that's the other problem. Like if you're living in a world where you make a lot of money and someone steals it all, what good is that? Like, aren't you better off being under the protection of having a steady job? And right, because man, that becomes different later on. A lot of people are noticing, hey, you start doing, like, a lot of people talk, oh, you do the consulting gig, right? But then when you can't do that anymore, you have no pension. You probably have no retirement plan. Like, and so you may have made more money back then, right? But going forward, you're not going to make any more. And there's other people who, they were in the school system for 20 years and that was a horrible job and they were, quote, underpaid, which is usually a lie, by the way. Some places that's true, most places that's not, right? But then they keep getting income for the rest of their lives. So they're retired.
No,
they're still getting income.
It's a good
and the
trade-off.
people who
Yeah, no,
People
it's a
didn't
good
do that
trade-off.
didn't get that.
Yeah, no, and I mean, like I said, I guess it's wanting to take, or I guess as a Christian too, I think that there maybe this is a wrong view I have of God, and maybe you guys can tell me, but like I feel you're freer to do what you need to do if you take responsibility for yourself. Like, for instance, like the government takes a huge amount out of your check before you ever get it. So you have to put in your 40 hours just so you can make the amount that you were, you were hired at or whatever, and so you have that wage or whatever. But if you're willing to take responsibility for yourself and pay your own taxes, and do your own taxes, then you can kind of build your life around a business. The truck you bought isn't a luxury item. It's
Right.
it's a work expense now, and things like that. But you have
Right.
to be willing to stick your neck out and take
Right.
responsibility for
And
yourself.
able. Like there are people who can't balance a checkbook. They're never going to do that, Josh. Like
Yeah,
and fair enough. Like and the thing is, like you have to look at it backwards too. The government gives you an awful lot too. Like
yeah,
you get a lot of employment protections by participating in that way, and so your taxes aren't going to nothing. Now,
yeah.
and this is a fair critique. It's a critique that I have in particular because I got real reasons to have this critique way beyond most people. The government's no longer upholding their end of the bargain, and people are saying tax is theft. And tax is only theft if the government isn't giving you some protections or something for it, right? And so when the government reduces, we'll say, your tax money to a scheme to move money around in an economic system, tax is theft. That is like, technically true, right? But when the government is using your tax money to protect you from bad things, say at exorbitant cost, right? So
Mhm.
when the government's willing to go ahead and prosecute identity fraud themselves, right? Then it's a good deal to pay a lot of money for that. Because if you try to fight identity fraud yourself, it's unbelievable. It's $1 million, right? That's why the insurance on identity theft is $1 million because it actually costs about $1 million to fix identity theft.
Of course, if
Like,
you're the government,
and
you
then
can
look,
just
if
make
you're
more
poor,
money.
if you're if you're poor, it's different, right? Like if you're not making $100,000 a year, it's probably not going to cost you $1 million to fix your identity theft. But for a lot of people who are making $100,000 a year, and maybe their standard of living is not that high, right? Like if I were making $100,000 a year right now in Massachusetts, my standard of living wouldn't be anywhere near as high as it is here. Like not even it's not even a challenge, right? Like things are so
Mhm.
expensive up there. Everything, gas, food, everything's vastly more expensive up there. That wouldn't be as big a deal. It still cost $1 million to fix identity theft, though. If I had gotten identity theft when I was making 120K a year in Massachusetts, I'd have been over with, done, finished. That would have destroyed my life. Because to fix that it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars because the government isn't doing that work. Maybe they should be. And in the past, it was less of an issue because they made the credit card companies do that work. Thanks, Bill Clinton. Uh, right. And now they're no longer liable for a lot of that, even though they're responsible for most of it. And so that's one of the problems is that when we don't realize maybe we don't have the foundation that Father Eric outlined in the beginning of the stream, right? We don't realize there's certain places we're starting from that we can build a virtuous framework from, right? Or a
I
framework
just
for
see so
understanding
much.
virtue from, then we don't have this relationship of subservience to the things that are bigger than us.
I just see so much freedom getting taken away from the individual, from the family, from just citizens in the argument of security. The meaning that like you need us. It seems that the like you said. I understand cyber the security issue of identity
But
theft
you're not buying
and
security
things like
from the
that.
government. You're not buying security from the government. But I'll tell you one thing that you absolutely buy from the government with your taxes: justice. Very explicitly justice. In other words, the government shouldn't try to protect you. Like that's not what the government's role is. The government excepting explicitly in war, right? The government's role is to provide justice. It's to It's to make things equal in a sense, not to make people equal, not to give equal outcomes, but to equalize things. So equalize the playing field,
But
equal opportunity, right? But they're not providing that because they become a money moving scheme, which is technically
yeah,
theft. Like again, these people who are saying taxation is theft have a point. It wasn't always theft though, and that's important to
yeah,
remember because we can go back. Everybody says we can't go back. That's not true. That's just a flat out lie. And you look in history, things go back all the time, right? And lots
yeah,
of things go back, right? That's
yeah.
just wrong. But also, when you don't go back and you strayed the path, what happens to you? You fall off a cliff. And so you sure as hell better be able to go back, and you better do it. And yeah, you can't do it perfectly, so you're going to lose some good things. But also, that's too freaking bad. Like that's the world we live in.
Where rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad, would you have no fear of him who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. He is a servant of God to execute his wrath on the wrongdoer. So Mark is basically just laying out a biblical vision of justice of the Bible that he's never read. But
That's weird, but
honestly,
also, yeah.
that doesn't need to be in the Bible. It's good that it's in the Bible. We'll take it, but it's like, yeah, guys, come on. This is yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you should be more everybody. I don't mean to single you out, Josh. Everybody should be more
No.
concerned with the corruption of structures rather than the structures themselves. Structure is good. You need structure to survive.
Yeah.
You personally, physically, in order for you to, we'll say, express your individuality, whatever. I don't like any of those frames, but whatever. I'll cede the frame to you. In order for you to be a good individual, you need a structure to manifest that. You actually can't
Yeah.
build one by yourself. That doesn't even make any sense. Those are
No,
monks
that
that
was
live in the woods or in a cave and
yeah.
never interact with anybody, and they can't do anything, right?
Well, no, that was what attracted me to the Catholic Church, is because I could see how unstructured the Bible churches were that I was participating in, and that there was this guy that would get up and talk for about 2.5 hours. And even though he was a very learned man and a lot of what he was saying, I was like, I could just tell. I've seen a lot of churches around my area sprout up and then close, sprout up and then close. And I think Paul
Right.
talks about that. Like he was talking about living stones possibly not being on the being around this upcoming year or something like that. And I that was one thing that attracted me to the Catholic Church, is I was like, this has been in existence for a really long time. Things that have been in existence for a really long time tend to stay in existence for a really long time. And all the churches that I had gone to, the one I was baptized in, it now goes under a different name, completely different leadership, completely different, a lot of different theology and things like that. And I could just see that generation to generation that the Protestantism does just not have the legs that Catholicism has. And so I started attending some masses, and I liked how the priests wore his vestments. I was like, I get it. I see the hierarchy. I could see that, you have a job. Like you were put here by a higher, by a governing body, and you were installed in this location, I don't know, and not to sidetrack us too much, but that's one thing. I don't know. This week I've been thinking about with Paul on the Friday stream, and then looking at my own local father, Father Susai, and he just looking at the differences, if there are, and it would be interesting to hear your opinion on this, Father. But I think that there's a lot of difference between a priest and a pastor. Like Paul described himself as a professional community builder, and I was like, so like you understand the corporate structure, and so you're just going around building that everywhere, like using that to build. It's like somebody who learned how to build a house, and so they just go around building houses. You know what I mean? And it's like out of possibly inferior materials, and it's just like you understand how to get the nest going and get the boards up and get the roof on and slap it together, and then you're down the road and come back and it collapsed. It imploded or whatever in that. And because to me, a priest is not like, I know that the word gets used interchangeably, but I see the difference between my priest and you know, and what Paul's doing, and that,
Right,
and it, like where we,
something that I just want to point to the key of it, and the key of
okay,
the Catholic priesthood, of the sacramental priesthood, is that I'm a mediator. I'm a mediator of God, right? So my humanity is supposed to be a bridge between God and man. And I
yeah,
think at some point, I don't remember where, I don't remember how it was. Paul, Pastor Paul explicitly said, "I'm not a mediator like that, not the way that a Catholic priest is." And so, I think that's part of the reason why the church for centuries celebrated Mass ad orientem, right? And it had this as this continual dynamic of the priest facing the altar of sacrifice, and then turning around and bringing the blessings to the people, right? Being that going between, going back and forth. But do you notice they don't really have that structure in most Protestant services? I say most. Old school
yeah,
Lutherans, which, hey, Lutheran
yeah,
churches have been around for a while, so like pay attention to that. They
yeah,
actually will
yeah.
do some of that more traditional style of worship there. They also have bishops and priests and provincial gatherings.
Well,
Not
it's,
priests,
I
but
mean, he mapped it. Martin Luther mapped it. I mean, and Calvin, they mapped the Christian church. I mean, like, even, like, I was never like, it got, a lot of it got washed out when you're not, I mean, in the Lutheran church, and that, like, I guess in the Protestant circles I ran around in, they kind of looked down on Lutherans just as much as they did the Catholics in that. And it was like, because my dad was just sola scriptura all the way. It's like, no, but I guess just what I'm saying is, like, even like what Paul was saying, like, oh, I'd actually like to go to like a more Pentecost. I think in like evangelical church, lots of updated singing of hymns, and a more robust worship service, and this kind of
yeah,
thing. And
yeah.
he was like, and I was kind of like listening to him, and I was like, it doesn't matter what you want. I thought we were all kind of on the same page about that. Like, it does not matter what you want. Like, it like, that's part of the work. This isn't. And I even say it like, when I made the note, like when I was explaining Catholic mass to my parents, and I was like, no, it's totally different, Ma, Dad. I was like they're not single serving cups. Like, we all drink from the same cup. I was like, it's communal. It's like I'm right there. I'm moving in the same direction. We all go the same way. Some go to the left, some go to the right, but we all follow this procession, and we all do the same things in the practices. And I was like, I knew this works because this is what they did to us in basic. Is that you all are going to dress the same way. We're going to cut all of your hair the same way. You're all going to sing the same songs. You're all going to address me the same way. I will not play favorites. And if I do, it's only to select out a leader who's going to accept all the responsibility for what you do wrong. So, and it
Right.
was like, I knew that that yes, you can build a body out of this, a fighting body, and it becomes very, very effective. Like, but it was, and I mean, even the infantry graduation, there's a part that they don't really ever show on video. It's not part of the ceremonies that you see videotaped or anything like that. It's only one that they participate in after. But I didn't get to participate in. I was out of basic by this point. I was just a helper. I got really sick in basic. It sucked. I was 17. I should have gone in much later. But anyways, they all, at night, you all go on this really long, really brutal ruck march, and then you end up on a hill, sand hill, and then there's a giant flag, and there's a ceremony that takes place, and everybody dips their cup in this really gnarly juice that's not Kool-Aid, and I don't know what the heck it is, but it's super thick, and it's supposed to represent blood. I'm pretty sure, and it's like, and so there's this real ceremony that goes on, and even like when you get your jump wings, they press the pin into your chest, and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and so there's these even like little bits of pain and little bits of humiliation and things like that you go through to be part of the group, and it ties you together like tighter than a drum, and I could see, obviously I'm not saying that those things exist inside the Catholic Church. I'm just saying that I could see that this works, that this structure works, and just because you can copy it and IKEA it, to where you've taken something, some really beautiful piece of furniture, and then you have an inferior product that you have to assemble yourself. That you're like, oh, they're the same thing. Well, yes, they're both chairs, but this one is beautiful. That one was not at IKEA. Like, at least to me, that seems like this little corner in a lot of these communities that'll sprout up, and that it's like they're not like a lot of them want to worship together or have like a communion together or something like that.
They're not one thing, right? They don't want to be one thing, which is fine. And you'll notice too, Josh, it's really weird, right? Because a lot of the Protestants will say, "Oh, the problem is theology." It's like, okay, dude, what Protestant church has maintained any semblance of a coherent theology through time? None of them. Like, they're not, it's not even remote. You can go back to Luther all you want, but like Luther would not agree with you. You can go back to Calvin all you want. You would not agree with what you're doing now. I'm sorry.
And then
You've changed so many times that you don't have a consistent theology. So if your belief is this is all about theology and you're maintaining like a Protestant denomination or whatever, I got news for you. Unconsciously, consciously, whatever, you're in the wrong place. You're doing the wrong thing. You have to be. If it's a theological argument, the Protestants have to lose because they don't maintain a coherent theology through time. It doesn't stick together and stay together and keep going. And look, it is what it is, right?
Yeah. Well, it's I mean, like, we're using words interchangeably that like, oh, they like calling Paul Pope, or why can't Paul be Pope, and stuff like this. And it's like, okay, well, like, let's not use, you know what I mean? It's like, these are not even close to the same thing.
But Josh, the idea of mediation, what is a priest? He's a mediator for the structure, for the interaction with the church, right? And a pastor is not.
And look,
flocks need somebody to lead them or whatever, or shepherd them. Sure, absolutely. But you also need a mediator into the structure, and that means you need a structure, right? And that right alone calls into question sola scriptura. And this goes back to some what I was saying earlier. Like, there's things that you can't do. There's things that I can't do. There's things that Father Eric can't do. And they're not necessarily the same things, although some of them might be, right? But there's lots of them. And so we need structure to help us with that. And that's fine, right?
Yeah.
And so we're not all out there trying to build our own boats, or trying to start our own YouTube channels, or trying to run communities, or trying to come up with practices, right? We need something to have in common in order to have something in common. It's not, it seems like a simple statement, but like, you've got to think about it that way. Again, is everybody listening to Jordan Peterson actually on board with what Jordan Peterson says? Or half the people listening going, everything Jordan Peterson says is complete garbage, and I'm taking notes and figuring out why? Because I know people that do that. So some of the people listening to Jordan Peterson are not on board with anything that I believe because of that one thing.
Yeah.
No, I had listened to Father Josiah Tenenbaum. I can't remember the YouTube series or his book. I can't remember, but it was and I was listening to it at work. So, I caught most of it, but not all of it. But Josiah Tenenbaum's Rock and Sand, his book, and then Paul, I think, even referenced that, or he was talking about, are you building on sand, or are you building on rock? And I was like, how? I see what you're saying, Paul, but it seems like whatever you're doing is very sandy. It's very, unstructured, very, very adrift, very, like, almost like he's having fun with it, I guess. I don't know. It's just,
well, he's explicitly said many times over that the reason he has his YouTube channel is that he can think out loud and get feedback from people.
Yeah.
Which, I guess, if that's how you want to use YouTube, that's great. Turns out there's a big market for that, or at least a much bigger market than he anticipated. That's fine. But yeah, That's what he says he's doing there. He's trying to sort his thoughts out publicly.
Yeah, except that I think that his thoughts have validity because of his civilizational position as a pastor. You know what I mean? So like people, he's naturally going to be guy's 6 foot tall and looks like Santa Claus and has a very fatherly way about him, and he laughs at like everything, like Santa Claus and everything like that. I mean, like there's the charismatic part of it and things like that. Like I mean,
Mhm.
there's a reason, and I don't know how many of the he was talking about hierarchy, Chad getting in early and Grimm being in early and all these who's who and stuff like that. And I was honestly wondering, I was like, I wonder how many of these dudes have really good relationships with their dads. Or even know their dad, or had a dad, and that, because that was one thing I noticed is being as a foreman on a crew, is like a lot of the dudes that I could actually get a hold of and kind of get them to listen to me, and that I would ask them, eventually, how's life, how was life growing up or whatever. We'd have that conversation, and it'd be like, dad was never there or whatever. And I was like, yeah, you just never had another older guy in your life that was competent to show you like a thing, to show you how to do something.
Well, or you're not used to submission, and you're not used to the value of submission, right? Like what you're saying is dead on, Josh. But I'd like there's more than one thing. Like there's submission, there's exemplification, right? There's the idea, like the very idea that you should listen to somebody else. Like I've met many very troubled young men who do not understand. No, you should actually listen to other people. Like they actually don't. They've admitted to me, "Oh no, I don't listen to other people." I'm like, "What? How are you getting along in the world?" And they are.
I listen to dropouts who make their own rules.
No, that's where I realized.
But that's part of the problem, right? You don't see all of these sort of missing pieces in general.
Yeah.
Like you don't notice. A good relationship with your father affords you. There's probably a dozen things. I couldn't list them all, right? Like there's all these things that are afforded, and when you don't understand structure and hierarchy as such, and the reason for it, when you don't see, we'll say, a good positive reason for hierarchy, you just want to get rid of it. You don't, and we don't see certain things like, okay, maybe the first people in, are at the top of the status priority, whatever, except that can't be true. Like, who is the first person to do a podcast? I actually know who it was, and they're still doing podcasts, but almost no one's, they're not bigger than Joe Rogan. Why not? Because that doesn't work. What about all the people that were in early and dropped out for whatever reason, right? And so, but what about the people who were in early and are still in and aren't big? Like that doesn't work. It doesn't map well enough. You can't go, oh, you were in early, so you have a high status. That's not true.
No,
there's something else going on.
Yeah, and talking about people to listen. I mean, that's exactly why I'm probably addicted to YouTube or something like that at this point. But the whole reason I started listening to so much Peterson was because I reached a point in my life where I was like, okay, I got a skill, but everything else fell apart in the process. My marriage, my relationship to drinking, which used to be a fun hobby, but it just got terribly out of control, and then it was like, just all these sorts of things. And I never heard anybody of any authority, and he wasn't a priest. Jordan's not a priest or a pastor or whatever. He was a clinical psychologist that was going over the Cain and Abel story, and he told it in a way that I had never heard, and I had sat through probably over hundreds of hours of sermons and I had never heard anybody approach it this way.
Right.
And I was like, this is different. I need to pay attention to this. He knows something about something that I don't. And I mean, yes, his sharp dress, his nice. Somebody was doing his hair because he went from looking like a ratty professor in his YouTube videos to looking like GQ, man of the year up there or something like that. But and I'm sure his daughter had helped him with that. And the spotlight was just on him, and the whole crowd was dark. And there were some tricks there, but it was also that he just played that I guess that part of a positive form of masculinity so well that he was hard as a guy in his early 30s not to listen to. Like, it was like, you look like a guy who knows what's up, and I'm going to listen to you until you prove me otherwise. And at every turn, everything he said, I mean, I never wanted to be married again. I never wanted to have a girl. Like, I didn't even really want a serious relationship again after my divorce. I thought I was done with kids. This year or 2 years ago, I met a girl. The story doesn't, it's not always that we met on Tinder, but it was like,
It's not like
we're
that, huh?
yeah, well, yeah, no, yeah. I mean, that's where I was, and that's where she was, and now this year we had a kid. We wanted to get married this year, but it's a little bit more involved in the Catholic Church than we initially thought. So we're having to go through the whole because we're both divorced and things like that. But and I started my own business. It's going how it's going. I don't know how that's going to turn out, but all these things were directly attributed to, or not directly attributed. Yeah, I would say it was heavily. I was doing what Peterson said to do, and then I did what Pageau said to do: get to church. Because I was like, okay, I'm finally getting a little bit of what Pageau says to do. And that rhymes.
Right.
But
Right.
then I was like, okay, well, what does he say to do next? Like, what do I do next? Because I was just on YouTube
Right.
listening to hours and hours of lectures, and then he was like, go to church, and I was like, okay. And that's when I met Father Susai, and that's when I met my local Catholic community and everything like that. And all of it happened super quick, and it's still I'm still in the process of it. But all of it was on the encouragement of Jordan Peterson, because because you're right, I should listen to people that are smarter than me. And YouTube, I can, for a cheap amount of money to YouTube Premium, I can have intellectuals in my head, for a long period of time. Now, some of that hasn't been all that positive, but probably not paying attention to other things as much.
You can't listen to everybody, and you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And there's a lot
Yeah.
of people that will tell you bad things, not necessarily maliciously, but because, again, everyone's limited, and some people are stupid. And stupid people. There's a big problem I didn't even understand that I was just informed of the other day. There's all these people on TikTok doing American Sign Language incorrectly, and they don't
No.
know they're doing it incorrectly, but they're teaching American Sign Language, and
Oh, no.
they're not consistent, right? It's very Protestant, right? Like, the way this person's teaching it wrong is different from the way this person is teaching it wrong. And so
Yeah.
that just spreads everything out. It causes a flood. Now you've got a flood of ASL teachers, right? Almost none of whom are actually deaf, and so they've never had to rely on it. And so your experience is different when you're not deaf, right? Because it's not your primary mode of communication, right? It's not something you had to do for a long time. It's not something you rely on. And so that
I would say if you had a deaf family member, you might be able to get to the level of a deaf person, because you do have to rely on it.
And maybe you can do it without that, but maybe it takes 5 years, and you can't do it in 6 months. And maybe, somebody gave you a business model of teaching ASL online as a way to get coaching to teach ASL in person, and that's a niche market. So I'm using a whole bunch of terms from things that are out there, by the way, right? Like right now, things I'm reading, right? And maybe that's a good way to make money. Well, maybe. But maybe also it causes a flood of ASL teachers teaching bad ASL, right? And maybe the market can't handle that. So most of those people that try that are going to fail in their small business attempt, right? Right. And so you see how all of this is kind of tied together. And it's interesting, though. I did want to go back to this, Josh. One thing you said is Jordan Peterson doesn't sound like any preacher that you've ever heard, right? Because Vanderklay thinks he's a preacher, and I'm like, he is not a preacher at all.
No, and he does. No, because he's working it out. I mean, if he is, he's doing something that I've never seen, to where most preachers and pastors that I know have like a 3-point, especially like Baptist, there's like a 3-point on the projector screen. We're going to go over these 3 points, and then we're going to, then it's off to lunch, and it's like, it's worked out, it's rehearsed, it's everything like that. But I mean, you can see, the whole fluttering of Jordan's fingers and his, pacing up and down the thing while he's doing lectures. He's working things out in real time sometimes, and he'll spontaneously be like, this just came to me, and I think he's authentic in that. He may have been an idea he mulled over, but it was, when he's actually under the lights and he has his, like he's even said that what I consider myself to do is what the closest thing I can relate myself to is a stand-up comedian, because it's a lot of it's improv, I'm only looking at, I'll often look at just one person in the crowd, and that, and so like, no, as far as I know, as far as no, I would never do, and that's why I don't really agree with some of Paul's assertions about, and I know he's probably watched more Peterson than I have, but I don't really agree with a lot of times what he describes what Peterson's doing, or that he's a YouTube preach, or yeah, they just try to relate him too much to a preacher, and I'm like, no, he's not Billy Graham, like he's not, that's not what he's doing,
Right. Not at all.
No,
And
yeah,
yeah, and even we'll say somebody like Billy Graham carried a lot of interaction with, like, he was the president's pastor, right, and stuff like that, and he had a lot of ins in the political sphere. And so you can draw those lines, but it's not there. And the
yeah,
important part is, in Peterson not only had a good relationship with his father, but he worked his way up a hierarchical structure in
mhm,
academia. Like, that's
mhm,
actually significant. He knows how to submit. And you can sit there and you can talk, and I have it on perfect authority that this is true. He was always trying to be famous. Fair. I don't particularly care. Like, his
mhm.
message is good. Like, oh, you're trying to be famous by getting out your message. Well, if that message is good, then I'm for you. Like, the
Yeah,
fact you're trying to be famous isn't bad if you're not bad. I don't understand.
well, no,
People use these ways of thinking, and it's like, why would you reduce it to that? Someone's got to get
well,
famous. Can't be no
Well,
one.
no, and if it is a hidden goal of his, because I saw a quote from, I haven't seen it too often, but there was a picture of him participating at something when he was in like high school, or it might have even been earlier that. He looked really young, like childish young, and it was, the quote was, and he had his arms folded, and he said, "I won't stop until I'm prime minister," and that, or I think it said that. And so, like, if he does have, these, like, because I mean, you could be like, oh, he's playing 3D chess, man. He's like, he's going to get
Right.
popular, and then he's going to do the
Right.
political thing, and and like, yeah, I guess you could say that, or you could say that he has a goal. He's going to face whatever dragons he
Right.
thinks that's the goal, and he's going to face whatever dragons he needs to, no matter how scary it is, to get the gold. And it
Right.
seems like he's taking some swings and making some major nicks, and facing some
Well,
things,
maybe,
because like,
and maybe he is, but maybe he also realizes that if you're in politics, you're kind of constrained in a way that
mm,
if you're just an advisor to politicians, you're absolutely not constrained, and that's actually a
yeah,
way better position to be in. And it's
oh, he's
weird that
way
people
more
believe.
influential, I'd say.
Right, right. Well, if you want your influence to remain untainted, you don't
Yeah,
want to be in a formal office. Period.
yeah,
End of statement, right? Because top down power from above doesn't work. You can put mask mandates at the federal level all day long, and it's going to cause a lot of damage if you do. So please don't. But
yeah.
ultimately, it's going to get reversed, right? Just like prohibition did, because it
Mhm.
can't be that way. You can't just remake the world the way you want. And it's weird that people believe that you become popular and then you become then you gain political power, because actually, if you look, it's almost always the other way around. Like,
Yeah.
nobody knew who Obama was until he ran for office. It's not he
Mhm.
ran for office because everybody knew who he was. That didn't happen in that direction at all. It happened exactly the opposite. And
And
that
it's
should tell
always
you something.
when it happens, sometimes it does happen the other way. It's always very odd, right? Like think about Governor Ventura in
Right,
Minnesota, right?
right,
Jesse the Body Ventura, right? As governor,
right.
it's like, oh, this is, and it's like, imagine if Dwayne the Rock Johnson ran for, governor. It'd be like,
No,
are we?
imagine
He has a
imagine
good
if we
chance of
had
winning,
somebody who
honestly. He
was
does.
but imagine if we had somebody who was popular all along, and maybe mentioned presidential aspirations and then actually became president, and that was shocking to people, like a recent president that we might have had. So why
Yeah.
would you be shocked by that if you also believe that popularity leads to getting elected? Obviously, it can't. Like, you're just
Yeah.
being weird about the whole thing. Somebody told you a bunch of things that you bought into, and this is the problem. Why did you buy into those things? Because you have to be submitted to something, and if you believe you aren't because you think you're an individual or something crazy like that, that means you're being manipulated. And the person manipulating you is you. And you don't realize what forces are controlling your thoughts anymore because you don't have a proper relationship to hierarchy as such. And when you don't have a proper relationship to hierarchy and submission, and you are submitted because you don't, that's not optional. You're definitely submitted. You're submitted to the weather, right? You're submitted to whoever built your house. You're submitted to whoever keeps your electricity going, right? You're submitted to all kinds of things. You're submitted to the damn internet right now. Like, the internet doesn't work. We can't do this, right? If you don't understand that, you can't tell good submission from bad submission. You won't know when you're under the influence of something that has given you a bad idea. You won't have any concept of that, right? Is it equivalent to listen to your local preacher and Jordan Peterson? Is one better than the other? Probably one's better than the other. I can't tell you which, right? But definitely they're not the same. So probably one's better than, is it better to listen to the government or not? Well, that kind of depends on the thing. How do you know? You know, because you have a healthy relationship with the hierarchy. And you can't say that's anti-Christian. I mean, certainly somebody kind of knew the rules and broke them on purpose and then submitted, right? And that's sort of what led to the whole problem or the whole solution would be a better way to think about it, right? Like, still listened, still broke the rules because they were bad rules, still submitted though, right? Like, oh, I'm going to break the rules, but I'm going to submit. Okay, why? Oh, because that's actually important. The most important thing is that submission because it highlights good versus bad. And without that, if you keep pretending like you're not submitted or ignoring your submission or trying to not submit, all you're doing is destroying your ability to tell good from bad. And then how many snakes are in the pit? You won't see the snakes in the garden. And maybe, maybe there are a lot of snakes. Maybe people are gumming up the works on purpose. Maybe every time you try to rally around a flag, the person you think that is helping you, that sounds like they're there to help you, is actually screwing up everything and making sure that you don't rally around the flag. Maybe it'd be hard to tell if you don't have a healthy relationship with a very large hierarchy, and all hierarchies have some corruption, but that's good because then you can see corruption as such. It's not a bad thing. It's inevitable.
Something to check against. Like you can check it against this because this is sacred. This has been around forever. This is the thing that we can compare.
How do you know if a part is bad? You only know if a part is bad by looking at the whole and looking at the part's relationship to the whole. Otherwise, you can't even make that determination. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, and you need a real thing, a sense of authenticity. Like, if you're going to show gold to somebody, you need to, iron, what is it? Iron pyrite or something like that. If it's gold, that, it's like, you don't try to tell somebody that this is gold because because you're going to give them a totally wrong sense. Because one of the biggest things that strikes you about gold right away is how heavy it is, and that's one of the biggest indicators is like, this thing is weighty. It's solid and it's dense, and that. But I don't know. Like I think.
What is authenticity, Josh? Like, how can you determine authenticity without, let's say, a telos, a head, right, and a structure?
Yep.
Otherwise, wait, well, authenticity doesn't mean anything. You said authenticity all day long, but if authentic to what? That's the telos.
Yeah.
Authentic how? No. That's the structure. What are they doing? That's the leadership. That's the thing that's driving it forward, right? Like, you can't determine authenticity without those three things.
Well, no, and I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts are on this because, like, okay, so a lot of people, when they find out that I'm a Hopi Native American, they're like, whoa, because anybody who knows a little bit about Native Americans, they'll often hear the Hopi and about all their religious practices and their prophecies, and they're almost so saddened to realize that I was not raised traditionally, and like I lose all my Native American authenticity. And like I've often told people, like, yeah, I feel like a broken Indian, like I'm just the wrong, like somebody will meet me and they'll be like, yeah, dude, I'm probably whiter than you are, like like It's like I am so like in Native American culture they call you an apple. It's like you're red on the outside but you're white on the inside. Belisana, and that is a Navajo word for it. And so yeah, it's just yeah no. And so you're there's this form of authentic native that you're looking for, and I feel like my girlfriend or fiance, she grew up on the Dulce reservation, the Hickory Apache reservation, and they had like powwows in the town. That was the first powwow I'd ever gone to, and like I felt out of places, some of the tourists that came by to see a real authentic powwow, everybody, and that, and I mean, and there is a sense of authenticity about it, and the natives do, people try to keep their ceremony and try to keep, the traditions alive and that, but
But how
it's
do you
dying out.
judge that? How do you judge that when you haven't been born into that structure? How do you know
That's
how
what I'm saying.
authentic it
Yeah.
is?
And see,
Right?
that was for me, like like I would go down to Old Oribe. There's three mesas in the Hopi reservation. And my mesa, the one my family's from, which I say I'm from, but I mean, we went out there for family visits and that, but like I don't speak. I always had a hard time telling which is one of the ladies was at. Like, am I related to you? Are you my auntie? Because like in the native way, everybody's your auntie, and like everybody's your uncle, and everybody is, so like I could never tell, and it was always really really strange to go down there and things like that. And yeah, and as far as like authentic, like that was one of the things like why I don't know that there really are like authentic, like because it's kind of like how Jonathan talks about like paganism, and how like he's like every neo pagan right now is just dragging around some dead body of an old god that used to exist, and it's like because it's like that's all gone, like we have no tie to that, and for unfortunately, like fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know how people want to say, what's happening in Native American culture, because most of it's on TikTok right now. It's huge, like huge, like amounts of Native American influencers, and that's what they do on the res. They sit around and look at their phones all day, or on TV and things like that. But anyways, it's just like the authenticity of those is like so gone. It's just like, whatever you guys are practicing in that, like, or whatever got handed down. I have no relation to that, and I wouldn't be able to tell you if you're making it all up, because like I don't some shaman from down in the Amazon or some medicine, you know what I mean? And they'll be like, "Oh yeah, medicine man bless this," and I'll be like, "I guess, yeah, man." It's like, and how much did he charge you for that? And that, it just, and so that's why for structure, like I couldn't go back to my Native American roots for religious purposes or anything like that. I really lacking. And like, some people will be like, in the Protestant circle, just say, well, I wasn't being fed or something like that, or I didn't feel like I was eating. And they'll say, well, you're just not trying hard enough, or you're just not participating enough. You're not that, or something like that. And I was like, no, there's a real spiritual nourishment you get out of liturgy and out of participating in Eucharist that you don't get anywhere else. And I mean, there's a real magic to that. And I mean, in my opinion, and I use the word magic because it's like, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of psychological reasons why everything's working. And like we described before, the structure of how, practices and things like that. But you just can't swap those out interchangeably. You can't just be like, oh yeah, look, we did this, this, and this, and now it's authentic. It's got the stamp on it, And but as far as how do you judge authenticity, I don't know that I could really put that into words. What are your thoughts? Like, what were you driving at?
Well, again, I think the key is what Father Eric asked on the Friday live stream, right? Which was, what is the thing? And you have to define the thing with
Okay.
the telos and with the head and with the structure before you can even talk about authenticity. Like, otherwise, you
Yeah. Okay.
cannot determine authenticity as such. And then part of authenticity is having a contrast. Whether you're contrasting, say,
Yeah.
let's just be silly, right? Well, there's a group of 30 people here doing a thing, and we know what the thing is. We'll assume that we know what the thing is, and there's a group of 30 people here doing a thing. That's some contrast. What we really want is contrast up, that vertical causality contrast, where you've got a big, tall structure where you can determine authenticity either in relation to the structure or within the structure, because that's what structure allows you to do, right? Again, You can tell a good priest from a bad priest partly because of the existence of that structure. And so you can say structure is bad and it's tyrannical all day long, but also it affords you all of these things that otherwise you don't have access to. And that's super important. You sit there and talk about authenticity. How are you measuring authenticity? How are you saying some of these people with YouTube channels, they've got something authentic to say, or they're being authentic, and some of them aren't? Because a lot of people talk about, well, Jordan Peterson used to be authentic, but now he's not. Jordan Peterson is the exact same as he was. He's talking about different things in some cases, but he's talking about them in the same way. But because they're different things, he's not necessarily using the same language because you can't. But he's not any less authentic today than he was back when he started. 0%. Welcome back, Ted. We're glad to have you.
Hey guys, yeah, sorry, that was a dramatic exit earlier.
It's okay. Well, you shouldn't have booted the guy who started the stream, but
yeah,
you gotta do what you gotta do.
Father.
Yeah, I know. This
You
shows my
didn't end the
ineptitude.
stream.
I know.
Didn't
That
end
was
the
God's
stream.
grace right there. That would have been a
Yeah.
real faux pas right there. I don't know if I would have
That's
been allowed
happened
back
before. That's happened before, by the way.
Hey,
It's like, you think,
amazing.
okay, I'm done, and you just go up to end stream rather than, leave studio. Yeah.
Well-
It can happen.
Big red button. They're both red.
yeah. Hey, Father, what was the cold shower part of your slide about? I think
Yeah, that was some kind of. So this slide here comes from a video I made like 3 years ago.
okay.
I'm even using the same color scheme that PVK was. I was just trying it out, and it was something with Wim Hof and controlling your body temperature with your breathing exercises, and that being kind of like integrity. But like I said, I wasn't terribly satisfied with how that went. I'm not taking it down because taking it down is for losers, but I'm not terribly happy with it.
No, I got all excited. I started, well, because of Wim Hof. I downloaded his app. I think I'm still paying for it. I haven't done the breathing exercises in forever. I got up to 4 minutes though, and with his breathing exercises, holding my breath for 4 minutes. Yeah, no, right. I thought I was like, there's no way I just did that. There's no way. And then I set a timer, and I was like, holy crap, I really did. I tried to record it a few times, but it was difficult. But I want to do it again. But no, and then I saw the cold showers, and I take about on the days that I work, I take about a 3 minute cold, like turn the water all the way on cold in the shower. And yeah, I got excited because I was like hoping maybe you do that or too or something like that. I thought I met another cold shower guy.
I mean, I do it for penance on Wednesdays and Fridays. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah, I did
Very cool.
Exodus 90 back in the day, and that's one of the things that stuck with me was the cold showers on Wednesdays and Fridays.
Very cool.
I missed the first part. Were you talking about the connection between integrity and ascesis?
No, we didn't get there. I just went over the Preternatural gifts, which I think are really cool, and we never talk about them.
Mm.
This is
yeah. So there's a little joke about Preternatural gifts right there in the beginning, which actually explains the ending of the book, but I'm not going to spoil it for you.
Yeah. This is my second time through.
Okay.
Well, you know what's interesting? So this is the first time I read this book, I had just read The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, which he basically just shreds his entire story in the last 15 pages and says, there's no narrative, nothing means anything. All the patterns and meaning you're seeing are all just like fragments of your imagination, and that we should all accept that the universe is this meaningless waste of nothingness, and that the best thing that can happen for you is for your consciousness to disappear so that you no longer struggle for, water in a dry land. And I was really cheesed off because I had loved the story up until that point. And so then when I went from that to Canticle for Leibowitz, there's some superficial similarities, and I just didn't trust the story until the very end because I didn't know if he was going to pull a Name of the Rose on me. And in my opinion, the end of Canticle for Leibowitz is basically the opposite of the name of the Name of the Rose. And so getting to come back and actually trust the narrator, trust that he's not making a mockery of what he's talking about, it's really nice. It's a lot more fun the second time through.
Well, and that trust is important, and I think the postmodern ethos destroys it. And I like that Cale Zeldin and Pastor Paul were talking about trust. The first part of the video is terrible, but I like the last half. The last half is fantastic because they are getting into story and the role of story. I think they've got some of that a little bit off, of course, but it's hard stuff because people haven't been talking about it. They've been talking about the individualism that and the individual freedom that the postmodern ethos gives you, which is we just do whatever we want, whenever we want, wherever we want, put the world back together any way we want because it doesn't matter, right? Or not because it doesn't matter. But that's what that would mean, right? If you can do that, then nihilism is also true. And no, being is good, and therefore nihilism is false. And I don't think we recognize how much that's wrecked society because we are constantly rebelling against everything, the government, the idea of structured institutions, and we just want to tear them down instead of revivifying them, which is one of the things Peterson talks about that I don't hear, say, preachers talk about, which is revivification, which is super important. We've got to keep putting our time, energy, and attention back into the things that are important so that we keep them going.
I mean, like that's literally obvious if you look at a house, right? What happens when someone stops living in a house? Like within 4 years, the roof is caved in. But then if you persist in a house, even badly built buildings can last for 500 years or more because people keep, persisting in them. No, that's interesting. I remember at one point when I was sort of at like peak Peterson digestion, like I was listening to this, someone like in like a Q&A section, they're like, why do you always put the postmoderns and the Marxists together? Don't you realize that Marxism and postmodernism are saying the exact opposite thing? And his response is basically, I'm not making any claim that they're the same. I'm just telling you that like people who are postmodernists almost always end up as Marxists for some reason.
Right.
And Mark, when you're just saying all that, I think something clicked with me, and I'm guessing I've probably heard this from someone else because, yeah, and you're right. I'm sure I didn't come up with this, but realizing like, okay, if you're going to take the world apart, and I think what Paul is trying to get at this week is the notion that you have to put it together some way so that you can even like talk to another person, right? I think this is what Cale Zeldin was talking about with the underneath, from what I could tell, is that like we need some sort of shared semantic space so that we can do anything together. Mark, this is your intimacy crisis, right? If you don't have shared meaning, then you can't relate. Like it's just that basic. You can't relate if you don't have shared meaning. Even when you don't speak the same language, like there's still a tremendous amount of shared meanings as being humans, like hand gestures, eyes, food,
embodiment.
all this stuff.
Where you grew up.
Embodiment.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So if you're going to take the world apart and you are making the claim that the way that it's reassembled is arbitrary, you have to reassemble it some way in order to operate together, to not either just like run into each other or kill each other or whatever, then who gets to decide how things are put back together? It's the people with the most power. Bing, bang, boom, it's Marxism.
Right. But the point is you don't and you can't. The only way we can be together is not by drawing things up from the bottom, because there's too many things and we don't all have the same bottom because we're not standing in the same place. But we can all look at the same star above. And this is what Peterson talks about, right? I mean, I don't think he takes emanation seriously enough, but at least he gets you in that general direction. And that, I think, is what everyone's missing. And you can't do what they actually did in the conversation, which drove me absolutely nuts. Swap underneath and on top. You cannot do that. No, on top is fundamentally and importantly and the most importantly different from what's underneath. Like there's no corollary between on top
absolutely
and whatsoever.
Yes. Because
the design matters.
The design of the car in the engineer's head is what makes what's underneath the hood possible.
Exactly.
Now, if you haven't met the engineer, you can then pop the hood of the car and come to an understanding about what the car is for. And in that sense, you're getting something from underneath, but what you're understanding is not the underneath. What you're standing is the above by looking at what's underneath.
Right. You think you're getting it from the underneath because you think you're over it, but actually the engine, the idea of an engine and the fact of an engine that has a telos, which is to drive a car, right? And that has other knock-on effects, right? That you learn when you get an electric car and then figure out that you can't defrost your windows, right? So there's all kinds of knock-on effects. That idea emanated down upon you. It manifested underneath you. Totally. Manifestation is underneath you. Sure. Absolutely. It's also all around you. Manifestation can be higher than you. That's a cathedral, a house, whatever. Right. But manifestation is technically underneath you. I get that. But if that's what you think the world is, that's because of your limited perspective about the world. Right. Because the world emanates down upon you. Right. That's what happens.
Okay, so because there's something that I think there's something in what Mark and Kale I think are trying to get at so I'm thinking about, like, to go back to poetry. I'm thinking about I think in the second of the four quartets when Eliot he has that scene where there's like all of these country people like dancing. It's Earth, right? It's the quartet about Earth, right? And so it's like it's all about like these cycles of life and it's talking about like basically like embodied peasant wisdom, which like as a phenomena is totally a thing. And so Mark, I don't know if this is what they're trying to get at with the underneath, but there is a sense in which like you can have in the human hierarchy, you can have people who are operating way up here and they miss things that people who are down here who don't have a global view are getting. They're getting it from the ground. And so like and you see that's like what's going on with fairy stories too. Right, it's going on with fairy stories. It's going on with like cultural tradition. That's that sort of to the degree that we're going to talk about underneath it being. Where does that come from? Is that, or is it reflecting the meaning that's coming from above? I think that's like what
right.
Well, I think that's
again,
what I'm trying to figure out.
It's not a proper recognition of limits as such. You are a limited creature. You cannot understand that is above you properly. That's why you might need a distributed cognition through time that's much smarter than you to help you do that. And you might need a mediator for that. I would call that a priest, by the way. There might be other mediators, but certainly that's one method of mediation. Another method of mediation might be a monk, but we don't have any monasteries anymore. So we need Corey to help us. Right. And so, but once you understand that all the affectations around you can be seen by you as beneath you is a problem, not a proper relation to the world. The proper relation to the world is through a mediator that mediates your interaction with something way above you, far bigger than you, right? And that's why, look, you can say whatever you want. I use Father Eric because he lets me as an advisor. Right, I do. He's not the only advisor that I have in that realm. There's an Orthodox priest down the street that I go see too, right? Because there's a bunch of things I can't work out. They're mostly really personal things to me, but also some other things. Like occasionally I have concepts that I'm like, hey, what does a priest think about this thing, right? But when we don't recognize that, we inevitably fall into the emergence is good category. Whether or not we start from being as good, like this this underneath talk is all emergence talk, and there is emergence. Emergence is not optional though, and some emergence is going to end up good, but most of it's going to end up bad and evil, right? And a lot of emergence is full of snakes, right? And if you don't recognize that, your community is going to have snakes in it. That's a little hint, by the way, and lots of them. That's also a little hint. It's not one snake. Whereas if you have a good community that recognizes emanation, where you have a telos and you have a structure and you have a leader, those snakes are going to be clearer to you and you'll have a way to kick them out, which is very, very important.
Look, Mark, the thing to even say emanation is good, and you're frankly, like, just to be honest, you're the only person that I hear phrase it that way. But to say emergence is good is to sneak something above everything in, because emergence, things from below can't judge themselves.
Right.
Right. So how do you judge if what happened is good? I mean,
but they're sneaking it in. That's the problem.
Sure.
They're sneaking it in, and it should be highlighted. Yeah. You're right, though. You're right. They don't realize they're doing that either. Most of them.
Well, to say emergence is good. I mean, this is the whole craziness of like the sort of meta narrative of evolution, of evolutionary progress. It's like
Mhm.
descent with modification. There is no telos embedded in that, so your capacity to make judgments about good or progress or anything like that have to come from outside of that. I'm
That's
going
right.
to take your emanation thing though, because it's the day after Epiphany, and I wanted to share from the homily yesterday, which was fascinating because, you know, for those who don't know, Epiphany is celebrating the coming of the Magi to adore the child Christ, and they, which like we're like, oh yeah, the wise men, and it's like, no, they were like astrologer sorcerers from the east. But one of the things that our priest said, which I thought was fascinating, is he compared it to the shepherds who were visited by the angels at the nativity, and he was pointing out that right, because you'd think like the shepherds are way less sophisticated than the magi, but his point is the shepherds were Jewish shepherds, and so they had the Jewish revelation, and so they could be spoken to through spiritual means, right? So even though they're like lowly shepherds, they're able to be spoken to directly through spiritual means, right? So they have an intelligent being that comes to them and brings a direct message of the birth of the Savior. The Magi don't. But what calls them forth is also something from heaven, but instead of being a spiritual thing, it's a physical thing. It's a star. And so there's a sort of like correspondence between the physical and the spiritual realm, which obviously should take place. And there's this sense of this like at the nativity of Christ, this like call that of salvation that's so great that it like operates on every level of reality. And to anyone who's listening, whether they're, you know, Jewish shepherds or whether they're, you know, astrologers from the east, like that thing is going to shine forth for them if they look in the right direction.
Well, the seeds get cast far and wide. I mean, there's even the scripture about the some were cast, you know, in the road and got trampled underfoot. Some were cast here, some were cast there. Some found favorable ground, others didn't. But during the harvest, you got all good plants, you know. And they were, Father, I'm butchering that. Where's that at? As far as the casting of the seeds, I think it's during the
are you mixing up parables there? It's easy to do. I mean, you've got the parable of the sower where
No, there,
some of
yeah,
the seed
kind of.
falls on the path, some of the seed falls on the rocky soil, some of the seed grows up in thorns, some of the seed falls on good soil.
Yep.
You only get the harvest from the seed that falls on the good soil. And then you've also got
Yeah, sorry.
you've also got the seed that's the good sown on good soil, and then the enemy comes through and sows weeds that are actually identical to wheat if you just look at them and you don't look at them carefully with discernment, which is something we lose in our English translations. But the peasants that Jesus was preaching to understood this, so there's something about peasant wisdom there. And then they have to separate that at harvest time, the weeds from the wheat.
Yeah.
So which one of those were you going for?
Yeah, sorry. Well, yeah, no, I was just, no, I was just, you know, he was talking about emergence being good or is it bad or things sprouting up just randomly and things like this. That so, like, okay, so like John the Baptist was out in the wilderness calling, like he was out, he was emerging. People didn't like that because he was out there preaching like a something that or am I still here? Yeah. Something that challenged the hierarchy at the time, and they was seen as bad, and that was seen as a bad emergence. But then it was. I mean, he was actually preaching the right thing. I mean, am I? I'm trying to say something here, but it's not
so,
my thought.
You could think of the parable of the weeds and the wheat, right? And specifically,
Yeah.
the word that Jesus uses in Greek is for a type of weed that looks an awful Pete's sake. Am I still here?
You froze, but
Yeah.
you're back.
Okay.
Type of
In order
wheat
to
that
in order to tell that it's a weed that looks an awful lot like wheat. So in order to tell the difference, you have to practice discernment. You have to know the difference between wheat that you should be eating and weeds that are toxic to you. And you have
Well,
to
and
separate those out.
well, like what Mark was saying, you have to have a check. You have to know authentic wheat. You have to
Right.
know authentic. You have to have know what an authentic wheat looks like in order to
It has to
check
be-
it against the wheat.
Right. It has to be defined. And also I want to sort of bolster what Ted was saying earlier. There's things that people at the top of the hierarchy know that people at the bottom don't, and not just knowledge, but also ways of seeing that they have. But the opposite is also true, right? Like and this is all the way in the Republic by Plato. It's all the way there, right? The philosophers can come to the bottom of the city and make recommendations that they will be hated for. They will be hated for, right? But also the people will make those, at least some of those recommendations will follow them, right? But the philosophers also can't make the things that the people down there make. And that necessarily also means some of the philosopher recommendations are going to be wrong because they don't understand the system very well, because they're not doing the work. And this is that level of imperfection that everybody wants to get rid of. Like, yeah, you should listen to the people above you, and the people above you should listen to the people below them, right? Like, absolutely. And that is an imperfect system, and it totally sucks. And it's completely full of all kinds of problems. But you also don't have a real choice. Like, that's going to manifest. The question is, does it manifest correctly? And the answer is, the way we can know that, the way we can know authentic suggestions, authentic advice, maybe it's not correct advice, because authenticity and correctness are not the same thing. They're different words for a reason. Maybe the way we know that is by discerning proper structure and hierarchy, by understanding thingness. Because if somebody tells you that that there's some sort of thing, right, that is a random gender, maybe that's wrong. Right? Maybe it's not a thing, and the way you know is because it doesn't have a telos, right? What's the purpose of, what's the final cause of this random gender that you came up with yesterday? Because now there's 160 in New York City. I don't know. There used to be 2. That was easier. They each had a telos, by the way. Maybe they don't have a head. Like, what's the head of your gender? Me. I'm the head of my gender. Other people are the head of their gender, right? And what's the structure? Well, like, you can just look and see the structural differences, right? I mean, clothes on, even you can kind of tell for the most part, man from woman, and that doesn't exist in these other made up genders. Like, it's not there, and you need that discernment to know if something's authentic. And so you have to have those 3 components. That's why I thought it was just, I hate to harp on it, Father Rick. That was brilliant. That question was brilliant. I'll just wow, that was great. Wish I had thought of that. That was a really good question to ask, because and it wouldn't have occurred to me that everyone doesn't know that thingness requires those, that has those 3 aspects that have to be defined in order for thingness to manifest.
Yeah.
What are the 3 aspects? What are the 3 aspects?
So it's something's going to be a thing. I don't know. This might not be exhaustive. I came up with it at the moment, but it needs to have a telos, right? If it's going to be something, it needs to have a head that can either be a literal, like physical head and central nervous system, or it could just be a spiritual principle at the center that gives you coherence. And it has to have a discernible structure.
Minimally.
And
Minimally.
Mark suggested boundaries, and he also said it was implied by structure. We could add that in there because it is an important part of the structure.
Well,
yeah.
I think Paul said something, or I think it was on that same stream, talking about the edge, or that other video that he was talking about the edge. Like, I'm trying to find the edge because things have edges. Things,
they can't find
there's
it.
a boundary. Yeah, and
they can't find it. And they can't find it. And it's been 5 years, and they can't find it. That should be a hint.
Well, I mean, this goes back to the interesting notion of community, right? Which is that it at least etymologically, it comes out of having something that has walls, not to be bound together in unity. And there's I don't. It strikes me as you can go back at least to the early turn of the century, and you've got this sort of spiritualist movement that's kind of rising up against sort of the materialist modernity stuff, and this sense of like expansion and like removing boundaries that's like people like totally got on board with. And in Paralandra, right, there's that horrifying monologue that the scientist Weston gives in Paralandra by Lewis before he is possessed by the literal devil, where the whole idea is like breaking down division and unity and bringing everything together in this unity of, it's like, you really have to be specific about how things are united, otherwise things stop existing, right? For instance, acids are very good at uniting things in a homogeneous mixture, right? It's like, that's what they do. They dissolve bonds so that everything there is the same, and it's like, okay, we don't want that kind of solution to the problem of difference. It's like, and so, yeah, I mean, it's like, the answer is not a surprising one. It's hierarchy and charity. Like, that's how you resolve that problem.
I like that formula, that solution, right?
Yeah,
Because it works at a
solution.
chemical level. That's
Yeah.
clever, Ted. I like that. That's really good. That the acid solution to equality is not the right solution.
Yeah. Well, I
Melt
mean,
it all down, so it's all the same.
to push it even further, I mean, you have these weird things about like even life persists by its capacity to maintain borders between things, right? If you let, on a chemical level, if you let all of the diffusion occur, then you're dead. Like, one of the ways to talk biochemically about like biological death is when you no longer have like diffusion gradients in an organism, like that,
The shells
then you're
rupture.
dead.
Yeah.
Your cells rupture. And so it's like, if you can't maintain like separation between ions, concentrations of the molecules chemicals and molecules and ions where you want them, that's death. And it's that capacity to maintain that hierarchical structure in your body. And you've got that top down thing working. I mean, this is one of the weird things that like led me on in the direction that a lot of like the stuff I've been thinking about for the last 7 or 8 years is when I finally read a paper by Stephen Talbot on teleological life. And I know I talked about this a bunch on my first conversation with Karen Long on her channel, but I mean, it's exactly that. I mean, Father Eric's notion of like a thing needs to have a telos to exist, you realize that like biologists literally cannot talk about living any kind of organism, even biochemicals really, without invoking teleology. It's just like if you want to talk about it like as an identity, and therefore something you can relate to, and therefore something you can talk about, it has to have a purpose. And you do that by separating it from other things in some meaningful way. It doesn't mean it doesn't relate. That's the other weird thing. The other thing to note is that separation does not mean you can't relate. In fact, separation is necessary for relationship.
Yes.
And so this whole idea of let's break down these barriers, let's get everyone together, let's, everyone needs to be in the same bathroom kind of thing. It's like, no, that will break down relationships very quickly.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of
and I
breaking
think
down, I
Well,
have
there you
let
go.
this stream go on 12 minutes longer than it ordinarily does.
No.
Out of my grace to you. So Teo got to be an observer today. It's a ridiculous time of night in London right now. So I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here. Thanks for coming on. God bless you all. Remember to keep your head, keep your eyes fixed on the purpose, and don't fall to pieces. God bless you all.
Thanks, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you.